Population of the United States is composed largely of immigrants and their descendants. Yet, immigration is controversial. Some immigration issues are political, others social, legal, and then there's economic. Our focus will be on the economic issues of immigration. Here are the key learnings of the lecture. We're going to describe the extent of legal and illegal immigration into the United States. We'll also discuss why economists view economic immigration as a personal human capital investment. Just as important is how business leaders should view the overall issue of immigration. We're going to explain how immigration affects average wages, resource allocation, domestic output, and income shares. We'll take a look at both the theoretical piece of this and give some practical examples. We'll also relate how illegal immigration affects employment and wages in low wage market areas and the impact it has on state and local budgets. We're going to take a look at two groups, legal and illegal immigrants. When you have finished this module, you'll have a better understanding of the issues pertaining to both groups and be able to differentiate political and media talking points about those groups. Basically, immigrants are motivated by economic gain. They're motivated to find something better in another country. Many immigrants have relatives that are already here, and the U.S. immigration law is heavily weighted towards what I would call family unification. Legal immigrants average about 1 million people a year. To put it in perspective, this is a small amount of the total U.S. workforce of 147 million and a much smaller percent of the total population. Legal immigrants enter the United States through a number of different methods. The United States has an annual basic quota of 700,000 slots. This quota is augmented by allowing refugees to come in through a different channel, as well as a specific diversity quota. Family-sponsored legal immigrants make up about 63% of the total. Again, this overall approach towards family unification. In addition, there are work and education-related quotas under the H-1B program. Special provisions of the immigration law allow 65,000 high-skilled workers in what is called specialty occupations, or high-skilled workers, scientists, and professors. Graduate and doctoral students also have an additional quota. These legal immigrants enhance the quality and diversity of the U.S. workforce. Illegal immigrants have a story that is similar in terms of the motivations. The story is the same as with legal immigrants. They're searching for a better life and opportunity. But with illegals, there's a big difference. They do not follow the legal system that was set up by the United States for immigration. As estimated from U.S. Census data, there are approximately 11 million continuous residents who are illegal immigrants. 58% are estimated to have come from Mexico. Why do they come to the United States? 3 basic reasons. 1, to find superior economic opportunities that do not exist in their home country. Others, to escape political and religious oppression. Finally, to reunite with family members that are already in the country. The legal and illegal immigrants' motivations to migrate, as I mentioned, are similar. Basically, to take advantage of perceived or real economic opportunities. They're looking primarily for earnings opportunities. They can earn much more money doing work in the United States than for similar jobs in their home country. In doing so, they increase the value of their own personal human capital. Many times, these are also people who have basically no employment opportunity in their country, even if they have significant skills. As an economist, you can look at the value of an immigration decision as an investment decision. First and foremost, they look at their revenue, the value of their skills in the United States. All else equal, larger wage differences between two nations strengthen the incentive to migrate to the nation with the higher wage. They also increase their potential for more education, better health care, better welfare benefits. Yet there can be substantial costs for both groups to get those benefits. First, moving costs. Moving is expensive, and getting the household goods to another country takes time. Renting or buying a new home is also expensive. For the legal group under a quota, getting a green card or an official permission to work and paying application fees is a significant startup cost. For the illegal group, payments to smugglers may even be more expensive. Stress and cost are both incurred when a household leaves their culture, language, and friends. Starting a new life in a new town takes a considerable amount of time. Finally, the illegal group can also face the cost of deportation and jail. So there's benefits, as you can see at the top, but there's also costs. And basically, in order to increase the value of their human capital, legal and illegal immigrants weigh both the benefits and the cost in their decision to migrate. Other factors influence a decision to migrate as well. Distance plays a significant role. The longer the distance, the less desire to move to a very distant country. For example, Eastern Europeans are basically moving to Western Europe, not the United States. It's not surprising that Mexico sends the largest amount of immigrants to the United States. The second is China. So if you take a look at the distance between China and California, the distance is not that long. To help reduce the cost of moving to faraway lands, immigrants make the moves by following what people basically refer to as the beaten path. Just simply stated, what people have done before and can communicate as to what to expect, what the differences are, etc. So they follow a beaten path, or using routes and processes taken previously by family, relatives, and friends. Once here, they tend to cluster in neighborhoods populated by current immigrants. So they follow a beaten path and tend to cluster. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but they do. For example, thousands of Russian immigrants have located in Boynton Beach, New York. Numerous Asian immigrants have also located in San Francisco. If Asians don't get into the United States, they typically move north and try to get into Canada through British Columbia. This type of clustering allows a less stressful assimilation into a host country. So their home country culture is maintained in some form. Age plays a role in calculating the return on an immigrant's investment. Younger workers are much more likely to migrate than older workers. Kind of makes sense. The return period is longer, and you have a better chance to recoup your costs. Finally, the lack of English skills can impede an opportunity to work in certain jobs. Some you can get by on the home country language, but you can imagine in a situation where there is a higher wage, maybe in the office or interacting just with customers. Without those English language skills, it really deters their opportunity. One thing that I think is in the minds of many who come, and many who have come before them, it's not necessarily the opportunities for them. They take a longer view and they look at future opportunities for their children. That's the real motivation for a lot of these folks. They know that it may be the struggle for them, but for their children, there is a better life. The returns on immigrating to the United States are, on average, quite substantial, especially in the long run. The economic benefits do exceed the costs. There are personal gains. However, there are certain economic issues that come into play. The information about wages and costs and even real job opportunities is imperfect. The gains can be substantial, but they may not be maximized. There is uncertainty and imperfect information. Therefore, after time, people return to their home country with at least some gains. They then transfer the information about the real situation in the host country to future people that want to come. So for some, it is just temporary to learn. and maybe give information to those that are looking to take a much longer term approach to migration. Although economic immigrants improve their standard of living, they may not achieve pay parity with similarly educated native-born workers. The skills that migrants possess are not always perfectly transferable. Why? Well, there could be occupational licensing, training requirements, language requirements, learning, etc. The way that it's done in the host country rather than the home country. So because the skill transferability is not perfect, they will earn less than similar workers in the United States with the same skills. They're going to earn more than they do at home in their home market, but less than similar workers with the same skills, perhaps for quite a bit of time. Finally, self-selection plays a role in who comes and ultimately stays for the longer term. Those that stay are risk takers and typically skilled, willing to make sacrifices in the home country for a better long-term life is a significant motivator for them. We know that many U.S. firms have been founded by legal immigrants coming to the United States for a better life. Immigration has an effect on the host and home economies. Let's take a look at the impacts on wages, efficiency, and output as an economist would. Let's focus on the theory first. Later in the lecture, some practical insights are provided. So when we're going to understand the economic outcomes of migration, we're going to ask the question, are both countries better off? Well, in order to get there, we need to make a few simplifying assumptions. I'm going to try to highlight what I think are the critical ones in order to make this whole theory work, okay? First, for our theoretical model, we're going to assume two countries, the United States and Mexico, with different wage rates and different output. We're going to assume that the labor demand is greater in the United States, and the U.S. can absorb more labor, meaning they need more labor for more output. So the need for more labor in the United States is a critical assumption to make the efficiency gains happen that I'm going to show you at the end. Okay? Other assumptions? We're going to assume that there's near or full employment in Mexico. We're going to also assume that the quality of the labor between the two markets is the same, meaning there's no deterioration in the skill sets. So we're going to make a simplifying assumption that skill transferability is there and that the labor quality is the same. We're also going to assume that capital is fixed in both economies, meaning that the capital in Mexico and the capital in the United States is fixed, and all we're going to do is move labor from one country to another. We're going to assume that All the migration is legal, and it has no cost. There's no moving cost, etc. So we're boiling down the assumptions to basically explain the difference between what happens to wages and what happens to output in both of these economies, and only that. So we're making some simplifying assumptions to get there. And really, the country wage differentials are a key factor in understanding how this particular model will work. Given the assumptions just discussed, let's take a look at these wage differentials and the quantity of labor demanded in each country as a starting point. On the left, we have the United States. The downward sloping green line represents the demand for labor. I want to say at the outset that you also need to understand the difference in the proportions of the two boxes. You can see that the proportion of the United States market is considerably larger than the Mexican market for this particular sector that we are looking at, okay? It's an important point. The starting point for the United States on wage is WU, and for the quantity of labor demanded, C. At this point, there is still a need for more workers. The only way that the United States can increase its output is by getting more workers into the system. Okay? Immigration from Mexico increases the output in the United States to F, moving on the left here from C to F. By adding more labor, we increase the output to F, and we lower the wage to WE. So in this particular case, migration of workers from Mexico to the United States has obviously increased the output in the United States, but it has also lowered wages from WU to WE. Looking at Mexico on the right, with its own downward sloping demand curve for labor, they experience a decrease in output from C to F due to the decrease in labor. Because they were at full employment, any migration from Mexico to the United States will decrease Mexico's output. And because they have less labor supply, the wage in Mexico moves from WM to WE. So, we see the differences here. Output goes down in Mexico, but wages go up. Less labor, and therefore the need for firms to provide or give a higher wage to get the labor. In the United States, the lower wage increases the output. While it may not be initially apparent by looking at the graphs, the total increase in output in the United States, measured as CBDF, if you trace that particular proportion, is greater than the loss in Mexico at FDBC. That's why I mentioned the difference in the proportion of the two graphs. Okay, so the overall world output in our simple theoretical model of two countries, our overall world output increases. This is what economists call efficiency gains from migration. Remember, it's theoretical, but you need to understand what happens to output and what happens to wages in both of those markets under those simplifying assumptions. What happens in the long term? If the process continued, wage rates will ultimately equalize in both countries at WE, as we showed on the previous graph. In the United States, wages fall and employment and output increase. Because of this migration, the United States economy grows faster. See how the simplifying assumption on the need for labor makes this theory work? If there was no need for the labor, it just wouldn't work. The wage rate may fall, but it's unclear whether employment and output would rise. So the critical assumption, as reviewed on the simplifying assumptions graph, is worth going back and looking at because it drives the model. Some have argued that the need for labor in certain sectors of the U.S. economy is one of the reasons that illegal immigration has grown over the years. Conversely, in Mexico, the standard of living actually increases as wages increase. But employment and output fall. The Mexican economy grows slower and could even contract. However, unemployment does not increase in Mexico due to the fact that the excess has moved to the United States. So let's just recap on this for a particular quiz or test question. We've held capital constant, and we've moved labor from one market with a lower wage to one with a higher wage that needed the labor. Therefore, in the higher wage market in the U.S., employment and output increase, yet the wage rate falls. In Mexico, the wage rate increases and the standard of living goes up, but the employment and output fall. So you need to understand how you would answer that in terms of what are the efficiency gains from migration. You can articulate those because you know the basic assumptions that go into making the model work. What's the overall effect here? What are economists trying to explain in terms of migration? That world output rises. That if you have migration, that resources move to the country that needs those resources. World output rises. And that there are efficiency gains because the resources are being used in the market that needs them. So yes, there are efficiency gains, but maybe not for all. So if we stand back from the simplifying assumptions for a moment, we can see that if this was the auto industry, that may not be the perspective that there are gains. That may not be the perspective of the United Auto Workers. If legal immigrants are working in the United States at factories that are not organized by the union. working for a Toyota plant in Texas or a BMW plant in South Carolina that is not unionized. So there would be efficiency gains, but maybe not the type of employment gains that the UAW would be looking for. It also may not be the perspective of certain agricultural unions in the United States. Up until this point, I have been just talking about legal immigration. I can say that illegal immigration, on top of what I've just described, compounds any problem if it causes an increase in the supply of labor that actually exceeds the demand for labor. So our simplifying assumption of more labor is required so that we can get more output may not hold if illegal immigration comes into the United States and just increases the supply. Conversely, more practical applications. In Mexico, there may actually be growth in the short-term unemployment due to the difficulty of labor transfer between industries. So there may be some short-term effects in Mexico that are not comprehended in this particular model. So once we start looking at certain sectors of the economy, rather than the, quote, economy as a whole, some of the simplifying assumptions seem to be a stretch. There could be friction on both sides of the border. So understand the theory and understand where some of that theory may break down in real-world applications, okay? Countries that continue to lose a group of highly educated workers with significant technical skills may view immigration as a brain drain on the home country. Look, they're losing their best and brightest who are searching for higher wages. Conversely, overall wages for U.S. workers in this particular model fall. You can see how this could become a problem for workers that don't have a union. They are continually faced with new workers willing to work for lower wages in the United States market, but they're obviously higher wages than what they can earn in their home market. Look, business groups in the United States see increases in income due to paying lower wages, and this is why U.S. employers have generally supported higher immigration quotas and liberal guest worker programs. In some cases, you could argue that they have also turned or closed one eye when it comes to illegal immigration, especially at lower wages, so that they can improve their bottom line. So as you're looking at the debate moving forward between what we should do to, quote, revamp the immigration system of the United States, be attentive as to which particular groups are on which particular sides of the debate in terms of restricting immigration or expanding immigration to meet some particular objective, okay? Mexican business groups may see just the opposite. They lose the cheap labor and their income falls because now they have to pay higher wages in order to attract workers because there's less of them in the home market. So Mexico business income declines, and they face lower output. Again, that's with legal immigration. Anything that I've talked about here, illegal immigration just compounds the differences and makes it more complex. One of the motivations to migrate is for higher wages. However, when they earn those higher wages, they don't necessarily spend all of that income in the United States. Many remit income earned back to Mexico to support remaining family members who have not moved. So, the income gains may not directly transfer into consumption in the United States. So they're basically earning money here, sending a good deal of it back home. So wages are earned here, but the money is spent somewhere else. Likewise, some come here for training and development and then return to the home market to improve their status there. So, this is a temporary migration, a temporary training program where host resources are consumed, but don't necessarily then the host doesn't get the benefit of that improved labor, that training, that overall resources expended to make employees smarter. They don't get that benefit because it goes back to the home market. All I'm doing is pointing these out so that you can see that real-world considerations break down some of the simplifying assumptions used in the theoretical model. Due to backflows, both of people, backflows of money, and the fact that there may be much more transition time and transition friction from legal migration than what's explained in the theoretical model. Let's further explore some additional real-world considerations, some complications and modifications that are different than the theory. Wage and employment adjustments may not occur in all sectors of the host economy. For example, the large number of immigrants working in the home building industry lowers construction wages and reduces the cost of home building. That, in turn, increases the number of houses built and sold, which increases the demand for U.S. labor that manufactures sheetrock, plumbing products, air conditioners, and appliances. The construction workers that come and do that type of work as immigrants are viewed as complementary resources to the plumbing workers and not substitute resources. So you can see here the argument of, hey, look, are these immigrants coming and replacing domestic workers one for one or not? And that depends on whether they're complementary or substitute. This particular view of some economists is that these migration folk are coming in and are complementary resources that basically improve the overall efficiency and approach of a particular sector. Likewise, lower wages in certain industries, either complementary or substitute, produces a higher return on fixed capital that already exists. Thus, the lower wage can induce certain sectors to invest in additional capital after a period of time. This long-term increase in capital increases productivity, helps lower prices, and increase output thereby raising the long-term demand for domestic labor. What's that saying? It's, look, these people are helping to lower the overall cost. The overall cost is improving the opportunity to sell more at a lower price. And because output increases, these particular immigrants help domestic workers in the long term. That's true. It is. But you can just imagine that takes a considerable amount of time. You know, the long term is always something that's kind of like tomorrow, whereas most of the arguments are, hey, I've got a problem today, don't tell me about the long term. Finally, the model assumed full employment. However, in many instances, people move from their home country because there is no employment opportunity in the home market at any wage. I think that this is probably one of the most important considerations of some of these poor countries, that whether they're legal immigrants or illegal immigrants, they just don't have an employment opportunity. And therefore, they search for a better life elsewhere. So the full employment simple assumption used in the Mexican and United States example in this lecture probably is in stark contrast to reality in certain sectors of the Mexican market. There's just no employment opportunity at any wage. Immigration has an impact on the social system of the host country. The model reviewed in this lecture suggests that immigration increases the GDP of the U.S. economy and generates, in turn, higher taxes. However, due to the fact that low-income immigrants use the total welfare system in higher proportions than non-immigrants, the fiscal burden is greater than the taxes paid. I'm talking about legal immigration. That the fiscal burden, the education system, the health system, the welfare system that is used, that burden is greater than the taxes that are paid by legal immigrants. The fiscal burden is compounded by the large number of illegal immigrants who use the public school system and other services. It should be noted that this situation does not exist among higher skilled, higher income immigrants. Okay, so this is particularly an issue with low income immigrants. Okay. The research that has been conducted on U.S. wages due to immigration has delivered mixed results. Immigration has reduced the wages of native-born workers who have low educations, especially those without high school diplomas. The overall effect on U.S. wages is really unclear. Various studies have produced a range of results from -3% to a +2%. So the jury is still out in terms of the overall effect on U.S. wages. in terms of immigration, you can see the proportion of the immigrants. Even if 1 million come in per year relative to the overall workforce, you can see how, depending upon which industry you take a look at, which industry sector you take a look at, or whether you look at the economy as a whole, you can see that various studies can give that kind of range of -3% to +2%. So you have to pay attention when you see these types of studies on immigration's impact on wages, which particular sector they're looking at, and when was the study done. Okay. So this is basically some fiscal impacts. The key learning here is, before 1970, there was less welfare, health, and education system that these people could access. Since 1970, the low-income immigrants have used the welfare system proportionally more than natives. Okay, illegals again just compound it, and the wage impact is really inconclusive at this point, and you can see how depending upon the sector you looked at, it could influence the results. What's the optimal level of immigration? Okay. As economists, we would say that immigration should be expanded until its marginal benefit equals its marginal cost, where MB equals MC. Okay. Well, that's more easily said than done, and more easily said than measured. However, immigration can be controlled to the benefit of the host country through quotas, which exist, through special provisions that allow certain technical skills to come into the country, and allow individuals to come to the country to improve their education. Hopefully, some of them will stay here. Likewise, on the illegal side, through strict border enforcement and transparent immigration laws. At the end, you have to step back and say, is legal immigration good for the country? Yes, in many, many ways. Has it been good for the country? Yes. And so as you move forward as business leaders, as voters, as people trying to understand the issues, be sure that you listen very, very carefully when somebody says immigration, whether they are referring to legal immigration, substantial benefits, illegal immigration, it is what it is, illegal, or both, because the arguments in terms of the benefits and the cost and what we should do is clearly different for both. The final portion of this lecture focuses on specific issues of illegal immigration. Much of the recent concern about immigration has focused on illegal immigration, not immigration per se. Some economists point out that a strong inflow of undocumented workers, to some extent, reflects the increasing scarcity of domestic unskilled labor in the United States. Only 12% of the native-born U.S. workers have less than a high school education. Only 12% versus 50% in 1960. But is this really a rationale for illegal behavior or condoning illegal behavior? The values and norms of the United States would say no. No, it's not. This is not about it's okay because nobody would take that job. So we're going to take a look at two extreme views of how people argue against illegal immigration in terms of the U.S. employment effects. Two extreme views. And both of the views are misleading. Okay, so I want to conclude the lecture by going through those. Americans are really concerned. Are the concerns justified? Looking at employment. Economists and observers have put forth two extreme views on illegal immigrants' impact on wages and labor. Okay. First, some assume that there's a fixed number of jobs in the economy at any one time. Thus, any increase in illegal immigration just decreases domestic employment on a one-for-one basis. Given a downward sloping demand curve for labor, illegal immigrants push the supply curve to the right, lowering the wage and increasing the overall demand for labor. So, have illegal immigrants displaced domestic workers? Have illegal immigrants displaced domestic workers? Yes. But only those domestic workers that would accept the lower wage rate and would not have opportunities elsewhere. Think about this. If all illegal immigrants were deported, decreasing supply, domestic employment would not increase one for one. Why? Because at the higher wage rate, there would be less demand for labor. So you deport everybody. What happens to wages, as we've learned from our model? The exact opposite of what happened with the Mexico to U.S. situation. Let's go from the U.S., deport them all back to Mexico. What's going to happen? Wages are going to go up. And what happens when wages go up? Demand for labor goes down. So the extreme argument of, well, it's all a one-for-one replacement basis doesn't hold if you understand that wages and demand for labor are related. At the other end, work that immigrants do is undesirable and would not be done by domestic workers. I really like this one. Okay. Yeah, these people take jobs that nobody else wants to do. Only they will do it. So, no domestic workers are displaced. Also not true. Many economists maintain that at $2 per hour, you may not get everybody to haul bricks to a construction site all day. Not at $2. But at $10 per hour, you would get lots of labor to do that. So, at the right compensating wage differential, American workers will do work that's undesirable too. So if the argument is, yeah, we can keep these wages at $2 because only those, quote, those people will do that work. Well, you give people the right wage and they'll do the work. So you have to ask yourself the question, is the employer paying the right wage for that labor, or are they circumventing the labor wage demand equation and just hiring illegal workers at a lower wage? So again, you can get people to shovel ditches for $10 an hour. They may not do it for $2 an hour. That's just a wage demand issue, not an illegal immigrant issue. So to say that only they will do it, yeah, only they will do it if you suppress the wage. It's a little different argument. Wages determine the demand and supply of labor. You have learned that as business leaders in this class. U.S. businesses have taken advantage of the fact that there is an illegal source of labor at a lower wage. That's not a political statement. It's just a fact. What is the current status of illegal immigration? In recent history, illegal immigration increased significantly from 1990 to 2007, a time period covering both Democrat and Republican administrations. During the Great Recession, that number fell by 8% because of decreased job prospects in the United States. Based upon the constructs of this lecture, you can say the benefits just were not present. Recently, the immigration population has leveled off at about 11.1 million people due to a number of reasons. Structurally, the birth rate in Mexico has been falling for some time. There are better job opportunities in Mexico, especially given the growth in automotive manufacturing facilities in the past decade. Think NAFTA. And increased deportation starting with the Obama administration. So government policies have been influencing that. If you want the latest information about immigration in the United States, the module has a data section, and you can always look at the latest information there. But to conclude, moving forward as business leaders, be very aware of the terms immigration and illegal immigration. Unfortunately, the terms are used synonymously in error. The economic implications of each group are different.